city libraries. This evening's topic is Michigan statehood, and our speaker is Joseph Oldenburg. Joe has a long career in both libraries and history. He has a master's degree in American history from Wayne State University and a master's degree in library science and information studies from the University of Michigan. Joe served as the director of the main library of the Detroit Public Library, where he also served as the archivist of the Burton Historical Collection. In addition, Joe has taught Michigan history at Oakland Community College. We're very pleased to have Joe with us here tonight, and we will turn the screen over to him.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Before I get started, I will take questions. I prefer if you wait till the end so I can go along. If you feel that you're just overwhelmed and you really want to ask the question, then just go right ahead. Okay, how Michigan became a state. Did we really have a war with Ohio over Toledo? The answer is yes, we did. And actually, we're going to start right here. So Michigan is the 26th state in the United States, and we became a state January 26, 1837. So you've got the answer before we get to the end. I want to let you know so you don't say, oh my God, when is he going to get to the end? And if I'm ever going to get an answer here if we became a state. And yes, we did. So we're going to start though right after the Revolution. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 ended the American Revolution. And if you look on the screen there, it says U.S. Treaty gained by the Treaty, U.S. territory gained by the Treaty of Paris in 1783. And right in the middle of that tan section, there's the Ohio River. And north of the Ohio River was a section they called the Northwest Territory. And the British were supposed to leave those Northwest posts, which were basically Detroit and what we would call Buffalo today. They called it Niagara. And the British refused to leave, and they said, where it says U.S. and property, what it meant was that property had been confiscated from people by the Americans, and the Americans refused to give it back. So the British said, well, no, we're not going to leave the British posts, which are those posts, which were, again, Detroit and Niagara. And where it says states and creditors, what that means is that states of the United States, which were the original 13 colonies that became states after that, and they had, states had refused to pay bills back that these creditors had said you owe them. But the real reason there was furs and money. So in other words, furs, which were being taken from places like Michigan, especially, it was a big area, were bringing in a lot of money to the British Crown, and that was paying for what we call the American Revolution. So the British hold Detroit until 1796, which again is another 13 years after the Treaty of Paris that ended the American Revolution. So the Northwest Territory, you see this here, and I'm going to go to the next slide. So that's the outline of it, and what it really represents is this: 5 states. What eventually becomes Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And you could see at the bottom there. So the Ohio River is the boundary of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And then Michigan and Wisconsin are the two the states above that. And again, what's going on back at that time is there's no roads. So Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, having the Ohio River as their boundary. The reason is that their boundary is the Ohio River is because that's where people traveled. They traveled on the river back then. And they passed a thing in what we knew basically as the U.S. Congress, a Northwest Ordinance in 1787. Can you see that 1787 on my screen? My picture's actually in the way. But in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, there was to be a government that was going to run this Northwest Territory. Again, this area here, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And this government was to be composed of a governor, a secretary, and 3 judges. That's the whole government. There isn't any more. There wasn't going to be anything else. So think of all those 5 states we know in the United States today, which is huge, was going to be run by 5 people. Of course, all men. So that was the government. Now, first thing, if you wanted to be separated and have your own area, you were going to be called a territory. And you had to have 5,000 people in that area, and you were going to be called the territory. Your rights were going to be guaranteed, basically what we know as the Bill of Rights today, which is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. If you wanted to be a state, you had to have 60,000 people. There could be 5 states in this area. And as I said earlier, this is those 5 states: Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So 5 states. Now, importantly, and that's why I've underlined this, 2 states were going to be north of an east-west line drawn through the southerly bend or extreme of Lake Michigan. So, and I'm going to show you a slide that's going to show that in a little more detail. And I'm going to show you that. So don't try and keep that in your head. And plus, slavery is prohibited. So first time ever in the United States, there's going to be no slavery in the Northwest Territory, which again is that Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. No slavery is. Can't have slavery in this. This is the first time. And who's the guy behind all of this? Jefferson actually is. Jefferson is the guy who wants this really bad. Okay, they're drawing this idea. They're saying, okay, we're going to have only 2 states north of this. See this red line here in the middle? That is to be the boundary. The southerly point of Lake Michigan, drawn there from that point all the way east. Trouble is, this Mitchell map of 1754. Who's this Mitchell guy? Well, he lives in Great Britain. He never comes to the United States. He has drawn this map based on what everybody else has told him. And if you look at that map, it's not real clear, but I can tell you for sure, Toledo is north of that red line. It puts it in Michigan. You go, oh, hello. That's not good. Ohio wouldn't have liked that. But that's the way it was drawn at the time. Okay. Now, there's some Indian battles that happened basically in Ohio after this Northwest Ordinance thing is 1787. So in 1790, now what happens here is the people in the East want to go and they want to settle in Ohio. Okay, so the white people come, the Europeans, the white people are coming and they're taking over Indian land. That's what's going on here. So in 1790, the American government sends some troops in 1790 and the US loses. Okay, so in 1791, they send some more troops and they lose again. How bad did they lose? Okay, they lose badly in 1791. I mean, really badly. To the point that we tend to think that Custer's Last Stand is kind of the worst Indian battle where the US loses in American history. No, not at all. In fact, in 1791, the Custer's battle is in 1876, so it's well after this. But our feeling is that in Custer's Last Stand, as they call it, he loses about 225 men. All of the men are killed in this particular battle. Not all of Custer's men, but all of Custer's men in this particular part of the battle are killed. And this is terrible. About 225 men are killed. In 1791, about 680 men are killed. So it's 3 times as many. We just don't know this. Most people have never heard of this battle in 1791. But it's the worst battle in American history where Indians beat the Americans, beat the white men in effect here. So that's just as an aside for you. In 1794, the US wins. Who is leading them? Anthony Wayne. So that's how the Wayne County comes to Michigan. I'm going to describe that in a little more detail shortly. So meanwhile, this Jay's Treaty, 1795, remembering British they're still in Detroit. They control Detroit, and the revolution has ended. In 1783, the revolution ends. The British don't leave Detroit again because of those other issues. The furs and the money, that's what it's all about. The British want the money from the furs. So the French Revolution happens in 1789. By 1795, with this Jay's Treaty thing, the British want out of Michigan because they have too much trouble with this French Revolution. Napoleon comes in 1799, and he is really a good organizer of military men, and they're afraid that Napoleon's going to get a group of men, and they're going to come across the English Channel and take over England. So they don't need any of this minor stuff, which they look at as Michigan as a minor thing. So eventually the Northwest posts are to be surrendered under this Jay's Treaty and to the US by June 1st, 1796. Well, typical of things in history, it doesn't happen on June 1st, 1796, but it happens on July 11th, 1796. Who is the commander of the troop that actually goes into the fort that day? John Francis Hamtramck. We know that name, don't we? Yeah. That's how Hamtramck comes to Michigan. John Francis Hamtramck, who has not Polish at all, has no Polish blood in him at all, of course. And that's how he comes to Detroit. He's the commander of the troops in Detroit, beginning on July 11, 1796. Stays in Detroit as the commander until 1803 when he dies. He is buried in Elmwood Cemetery today. So you can actually go and see his gravesite if you would like to do that. So Anthony Wayne actually comes to Detroit in August of 1796, and Wayne County is declared. And you look at this map that's up on the screen now, August 15, 1796, it includes all of Michigan, part of Wisconsin, includes Milwaukee, you see that? Includes a little bit of Illinois, including Chicago. Cleveland is huge. It takes the whole state of Michigan. That's Wayne County as of August 1796. It's huge. That's the Wayne County of that time. Our current Wayne County is created about 1815 when our land is actually surveyed and things are broken down much the way we see them today. But just to give you an idea. So that's where the Wayne of Wayne County, Anthony Wayne, who was a Revolutionary general. The reason he wins against the Indians in 1794 is because he takes the time to train the men. The reason that we lost in 1790 and 1791 is because the men were not trained well. They were basically militia, and militia were always known to cut and run because they were very, very little trained, and they didn't have the courage and they didn't have the training to do the work that they were asked to do. That was most of the time. But Wayne took almost a year to train them, and then when they took them into battle, they knew what they were doing. Okay, Ohio statehood, 1802. Now this is the thing. The first state that becomes a state in this new Northwest Territory is the state of Ohio. And they become a state in 1803 because what has happened here is the settlement of the Northwest Territory begins from the east. And what they do is people get on the Ohio River and they start floating down the river, again, from the east to the west. And the Ohio River is the southern boundary of Ohio. So they float down the river. That's the bottom of that color line at the bottom of Ohio, and they peel off. So the Steubenville district and then the Zanesville district, they peel off every mile or two, and then they start to get their farm, and it's already been surveyed so they can actually register their land and start farming right away. So what I'm saying here is Ohio gets settled from the south towards the north, and that's what actually happens in Indiana and Illinois. It's the same thing. The river is their transportation route. So they're settled first. So what happens is when they would have filed basically a petition with Congress saying, okay, we want to become a state. We've got our 60,000. Remember, under the Northwest Ordinance, they had to have 60,000 people. They say they apply with the federal government. They say, we have our 60,000 people, and we'd like to become a state, and here's our constitution. They would draw up a constitution and send that to the Congress too. And they said, in our constitution, we are going to have a boundary, and we want to have a boundary that would include Toledo in Ohio. and we want to port on, they wanted to port on Lake Erie, and they expected that Toledo, which was actually called Port Lawrence then, but we know it as Toledo today, they expected it to really thrive. And they would accept, remember, there's that line that goes from the southern point of Lake Michigan directly east, all the way over, just kept going all the way over to the end of Ohio in the north, and that was going to be the boundary, okay? But and then they said, oh, by the way, if it didn't include Toledo, then they were going to move the boundary north. And so Congress said, okay, we'll accept your constitution, but we're not really sure about this Ohio boundary or northern boundary thing, and we'll refer it to a committee. Well, nothing happened. So Congress approved this boundary that was kind of floating out there, not by the ordinance of 1787, which was a national law, which was the US Congress. And so Ohio has gotten the border they want. Now, Ohio's a state. That means they have 2 senators and at least 1 representative in the US Congress. Okay, all right, so they're ahead of the game here. Okay, now what's going to happen? So Ohio's a state. They're a state. They're the first ones out of the Northwest Territory that becomes a state. So the Congress says, okay, so Ohio is a state. Now they don't say, okay, the rest of this territory again, which was the Northwest Territory, and included what we know as the states today of Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We don't want to call that the Northwest Territory anymore. We're going to call it Indiana Territory. And so Michigan says, well, okay, so where's the capital of this thing called Indiana Territory? And the Congress says, well, we're going to call the new capital Vincennes, Indiana, which is 450 miles from Detroit. And so that's going to take you a long ways to drive today. And back then, that's like a month's worth of travel. So Michigan says, no, we don't like that. We don't. So they apply for territory status. Michigan does. And they say, okay, and with our application for territory status, we want our boundary on the south, which means it's going to be boundary with Ohio, based on our Northwest Territory line, which is that line that is the southern point of Lake Michigan and all the way across. And the Congress says, oh yeah, okay, fine. Nobody sees a discrepancy here. And so Michigan's asked for a boundary that's not the same as Ohio's northern boundary. There's going to be a problem sometime in the future. But the Congress doesn't need to see it and do anything about it. All right. That's what Michigan, this is what Michigan Territory would have looked like between the years 1805 and 1818. So 13 years are going along and they're just cruising. Everything's fine. That black kind of blurry line, that's actually the line, the international border between the United States and Canada. And thanks to Benjamin Franklin, that's what happened at the end of the American Revolution. He's the one that drew that so that we have the border we have today, that Michigan is in the United States rather than Canada, because they could have cut it off. But thanks to Benjamin Franklin, we are in the United States. Okay, just to give you an idea, this is kind of an aside here, but if you look at this slide, you see this is the way all land is actually divided in Michigan. It's actually surveyed. So you see the east-west border, it says baseline. So that is 8 Mile Road, baseline. And actually there's a couple places, especially at Haggerty and 8 Mile. There on the sign, you will, on the signs there, it will say on 8 Mile Road, it says baseline. So that's your baseline, your east-west baseline for the survey of Michigan. And the principal of Meridian is actually Meridian Road, which is east of Lansing. And that's actual road in Michigan. I just wanted you to see, that's the sort of thing. So all the survey of Michigan is based on those 2 roads. Survey in Detroit is a different story because of the French actually coming in, Detroit being settled actually early in 1701, and there's other things going on there at the same time. I don't want to get into that now. So Michigan Territory becomes effectively is settled in July 1, 1805. There's a governor, William Hull, a secretary named Stanley Griswold, the three judges. Remember, there's a governor, a secretary, and three judges, the territory. So the Northwest Territory, that 5 states again, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they're all becoming states over a period of time. But then at first it becomes a territory, then it becomes a state. So Michigan Territory then is also run separately by a governor, a secretary, and 3 judges. It's the same thing as the Northwest Territory, but it's only just its own territory. So of course, the judges, Augustus B. Woodward, he's the guy who Woodward Avenue is named for. We're going to come back to him shortly. Frederick Bates, Samuel Huntington. So William Hull is a Revolutionary War military guy. That's why he got that job. Secretary, Stanley Griswold, who was an Ohio guy. Woodward is Griswold is a supporter of Jefferson. Jefferson at this point he's the guy who names all of these. So he gets to name everybody who's in the government in Michigan Territory. Stanley Griswold is a supporter of Jefferson, as is Woodward. Frederick Bates is the only guy who actually lives in Detroit in Michigan Territory. And Samuel Huntington is also a supporter of Jefferson. He lives in Ohio. Well, so July 1st, Michigan Territory literally becomes legal. Oh, hello. On June 11th, 1805, the local baker in Detroit is saddling his horse to take it somewhere. And it's not too smart. He puts his pipe down in the hay. And while he's saddling his horse, the pipe falls over the wrong way and a fire starts. And hello, the city of Detroit burns to the ground, except for one brick building. So the city of Detroit is gone. This is June 11th, 1805. So about 3 weeks before the territory takes effect, becomes legal, the city has burned to the ground. Well, that's not too good. Bates is the only official on site, so he's just one of the judges. And as soon as the fire has been effectively burns itself out, because they don't have fire departments back then. It's basically just carrying buckets from the river, which isn't too far from the front gate, about 30 or 50 feet. But still, they can't put the fire out, so it burns itself out. And everybody says, okay, fine. There's maybe about 80 buildings in the fort at this point in 1805. And so everybody says, okay, we're going to build again. He says, no, come on, wait. The officials are going to be here. Let's just kind of hang out for 3 weeks. So they do. And finally, so the officials get to town around June 30th, July 1st. And Woodward is appointed a 1-person committee to design a new city. Okay. I put some things in here. Okay. Augustus Woodward, this is him. This is the only picture that's ever survived. This is well before photography, which as an aside, photography doesn't actually come in until 1839, 1840. And a Frenchman man in France invents what we know as photography today. He's a friend of Jefferson. He's appointed judge of Michigan Territory. He gets there on June 30th, 1805. He's appointed a committee of 1 to draw up a plan. He and Hull together put a plan together in 1806. They take it to Washington. The Congress immediately loses it. And then they go back to Detroit, come up with a plan by Abijah Hull, which is a brother of William Hull, again, who is the governor in 1807. And Woodward loved Greeks and Romans. He later on in 1817 comes up with a plan for a universal school, which ends up being the University of Michigania in 1817. And that's how the University of Michigan starts, just as another aside. And what the plan looks like is this. The plan of Detroit in 1807, says Woodward. So the red line up the center there, or I guess it's the black line on this one, is Woodward Avenue. And the one to the left is Michigan Avenue. The one to the right is Gratiot, which goes to Port Huron, which was originally called Fort Gratiot. They built a fort there in 1812 during the War of 1812. And it eventually, and the man who built it was Charles Gratiot. And so it eventually gets called Fort Gratiot, and then eventually in the 1830s is named Port Huron. And the road to it was called Fort Gratiot Road, and that's how it gets its name. Woodward is the north-south, and Jefferson is the east-west. So he names it after and Woodward. And that plan actually is the effective plan. They don't send it, the plan again, in 1806, Woodward and Hull took the plan to Congress in Washington, D.C. This is based on what Washington, D.C. was designed by a Frenchman named L'Enfant. And Woodward, again, was in Washington, D.C. in the late 1790s, early 1800s. And so he took that plan, brought it to Michigan, had it designed by this man named Hull, again, a brother of William Hull. And so that's how this design, it only is in the downtown part of Detroit. He was going to have these big avenues and these big circular areas, but they never really happened beyond basically downtown. And what really happens then is, this is what the plan is in 1830. So by 1830, and this is what downtown Detroit really looks like today. By 1830, Congress discovers, oh, well, you know, we don't really have a plan of Detroit. And so a man named Mullet is asked to draw up the actual plan of Detroit. And they send this to the Congress and says, well, this is the plan of downtown Detroit. This is what the plan really looks like now. And that's what they submit to the Congress. And that's official then at that point in time. And you can see the beginnings of Detroit. So the Chicago Road, there is Michigan Avenue. And I'm going to be giving a talk in Northville at the Northville Library. Also, it's going to be a talk like this online. You can check with them to register if you want. August 13th at 7 o'clock. You can Zoom on that also if you'd like. And I'll be telling the same part of this. Michigan Avenue goes to Chicago. Actually, Michigan Avenue ends in Aberdeen, Washington State. Goes a long way. Probably didn't know that, because I know I didn't know it went as far as it did. But yes, it goes a long way. And then to the right there, you can see Campus Martius in the center. Grand Circus at the top. Woodward Avenue in the center. And then I'm going to do this now. You don't have to laugh, but I used to do this with my class, and I ended my lecture, and I figured they wouldn't be happy with this, whether they laughed or not. So the story was that Woodward would, Augustus Woodward people would say to him, well, you're so conceited, Woodward, you named the main road after yourself. And he said, no, it goes towards the woods. It would go woodward. And of course the kids would groan. And the thing was that was the end of the lecture for the night. So I'd say, so we're done for the night. And they were happy that happened. So they didn't have to laugh at that for me. So moving right along, as they say, the War of 1812 comes along. So it's 1793 to 1811. England and France are at odds. Again, Napoleon comes into power. The British do a thing called impressment. They need sailors because they've got a lot of ships. They built a ton of ships to fight the French, and they need sailors. So they take sailors from American ships. And this is an image of, so the British officer here and his bosun mate, which is the guy on the right, are saying, okay, who do we take here? Initially, and they followed it on and off through the War of 1812, would try and take men who had actually served in the British Navy and had jumped ship, as one would say. They would leave the ship and leave British ships, because the British ships were brutal. They were really hard on their men, very hard. And so these guys, as soon as they had a chance to jump ship near an American port or in an American port, they would gone off. And the British would keep these names. And part of there's another incident that also kicked off the War of 1812. was an incident where some British men left the ship, and then they were on they were on an American ship, and they were taken off. And one was hanged, and others were kept in prison and were freed later. And that was part of so this impressment was to literally take men and force them to serve in the British Navy, because they didn't have the men that were willing to serve. So they would take them from American ships. And that's what impressment was. And that was one of the leading reasons why we get into the War of 1812. So Congress declares war on Great Britain in June of 1812. And the whole idea of this is that it's going to affect what goes on in Detroit. So Hull, again, who is the governor of Michigan Territory, is a Revolutionary veteran. He's made appointed a commander at Detroit. So the War of 1812 was coming to Detroit. So he goes to Toledo to pick up Ohio troops. And he's ordered to take Fort Malden, which is Amherstburg, across the river from Detroit. What we know is basically Windsor today. It's downriver, about 18 miles from, basically, if you think of where the bridge or where the tunnel goes over, it's 18 miles south of that present-day Amherstburg. Basically across from what we know as the old Boblo Island. So Hull invades Canada. So if you think of Cheyne Park, where the old Stroh's Brewery used to be, there was also Park Davis is in the same area there. He goes across there, goes across the river, and he has a cannon. So what you do is you put a cannon on a flatboat and you take it across. But what you have to do is you can't just carry this cannon. I mean, the thing weighs literally a ton. So you have to build what's called a gun carriage. You got to build literally out of wood, and you got to build wheels for it and the whole thing to be able to carry, drag it 18 miles down river on whatever little road there is, down to Fort Malden and blow Malden off of the face of the earth so you can take it, and then the British are gone. Well, he has to take time to build these gun carriages. So this is going to slow things down. Meanwhile, up at Fort Mackinac, which the Americans control, here's the fort. And it's going to be difficult to take because it's high and they can shoot down on you and they can keep things going. And but the back door is not as hard to go into. And Fort Mackinac falls to the British July 28, 1812. So the word goes out to William Hull. He's told, he's worried because the Indians are swarming down. And he has about 2,000 men, but he has about 1,400 of those 2,000 are militia. And militia, again, are tremendously unreliable. So he says, no, we're not going to be able to take Malden. And he withdraws back to Detroit. And the British demand a surrender. They say, you've got to surrender to us. And Hull says, no, I'm not going to surrender. And the cannons open fire. Now, Detroit is not on a flat surface. It's about 30 feet above the river. Detroit is basically where we know as Hart Plaza today. Hart Plaza has been trimmed down, basically. It's kind of at somewhat river level today, but it was about 30 feet higher back then. And so they could literally from the Windsor side, the British side, they could see what was going on. So they could fire their cannon right in there. And so the cannons opened fire. And on August 16th, 1812, there's 600 British soldiers and 700 Indians. Militia is unreliable. A national first is Mr. Hull surrenders the city of Detroit without firing a shot. To this day, it's a national disgrace because Detroit is the only American city that ever surrendered without a shot being fired. It is a national disgrace in American history. Now, we have to, the president, which is Madison at this point in time, determines we've got to control the lakes, because what happens is the British can come down from Fort Niagara, which is in the center there. So look at that Battle of Lake Erie sign. Go up to where it says New York, and then just to the left of that, a little bit higher, about a half an inch, it says Fort Niagara. So that's Buffalo. So you go Fort Niagara, ships can go through there with men and supplies like food, go to Amherstburg, come back and forth. And so they can continue to supply Amherstburg. So you've got to control the lakes, and Madison realizes that finally. So what happens is he realizes he's got to control the lakes. So he says, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to build some ships and control the lakes. So a man named Oliver Hazard Perry, a Commodore, is sent, and he's going to build 6 ships at Erie, Pennsylvania. You can see that down there. It's in the middle between Cleveland and Fort Niagara. It's on the south shore of Lake Erie. And at Erie, he builds 6 ships and attacks the British on September 10th, 1813. And he wins. And on the back of an envelope, he writes, "Dear General, we have met the enemy and they are ours. 2 ships, 2 brigs, 1 schooner, and 1 sloop." So that's a famous line in American history. We have met the enemy and they are ours. What he has done, he has written to the commanding general, who is William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison is going to be known later in American history as the first president who dies in office. William Henry Harrison is in his 60s at this point. He's elected finally in 1840, takes office on March 4th, 1841, gives a long speech about 2 hours in the rain, stands and watches a parade, gets pneumonia, and dies in 30 days. He's the first president that dies in office, and he has a very short presidency. Like I said, about 30, I think he serves 30, 31 days. So he's known for that, but his prominence is from his days during the War of 1812. But as a result, then, without control of the lakes, the British must leave Detroit. So they leave and they go to London, Ontario, and there Harrison defeats the British at a thing called the Battle of the Thames River, which is in London, Ontario. In other words, London, England has a river called the Thames, and London, Ontario has a river called the Thames. And at this Battle of the Thames, the British are defeated. An Indian called Tecumseh, which you've probably heard of. He is a Miami Indian who actually is from Ohio, but he's fighting on the British side here, is killed. And so as a result of that, then the Indians are not willing to fight any longer. And on October 5th, the War of 1812 in the Northwest, which means Michigan in this case, the war in the Northwest, as far as the War of 1812, is ended. The significance of the War of 1812 is that the Indians will fight no more. This is the last time that the U.S. is going to fight against England. And the big thing for Michigan is the settlement is now open, is the most important result of the war as far as Michigan is concerned. We're getting to how important this is going to be to Michigan actually in its borders. So now there's 4 things that are going to affect the settlement of Michigan between 1807 and the 1830s. Indian treaties, and I'm going to cover these separately, but I'm going to give you a list of them individually. The U.S., so they own the land. The thing was, the French didn't really want land. All they wanted was just the land that they had their trading posts on, and then they were going to trade with the Indians for the furs. And again, the whole thing about the fur trade was the people in Europe wanted fur hats and fur coats to follow the kings of especially the King of France. King of France, Louis XIV, back in the 1600s and early 1700s, liked fur hats and fur coats. And so all the nobility wanted to wear them, and anybody else below the nobility wanted to wear them. Where's the best furs? They're in Michigan. That's why Michigan becomes important, because the best furs are there, and that's where the money is, basically. So the French only want land where the fur trade places are. The British As far as they saw it, we own all the land. No, forget about the Indians. We own it all. The Americans eventually take over, and they believed in treaties. We don't own the land. We have to get the treaty by either buying it or negotiating with the Indians about it. So we have to have treaties. They believed in it. Whether they followed the treaty after is another question. So treaties are number one. Number two, and this is a Michigan settlement, how they settle Michigan by the Europeans, by the people that come here, basically. The white man, one would say. Erie Canal is number two, access from New York and New England to settle Michigan. Number three is the steamboats from Buffalo to Detroit. And number four is the price of land. The land is priced at a reasonable figure that you can buy land and have a decent sized farm. Okay, we're going to do them one at a time. Treaties. So over a period of time, between 1807 and the 1840s, we're going to start in the bottom right corner where you see Treaty of Detroit, 1807, bottom right corner of Michigan. So southeast Michigan, what we know as southeast Michigan today. Treaty of Detroit, 1807. So in 1807, Hull, who is then the governor of Michigan, again, Michigan is controlled by a governor, a secretary, and 3 judges. They treat with the Indians and get the Indians to agree, okay, we'll give up this land if you give us, etc. Well, the etc. was some money, probably guns, and the last thing on the list, and sometimes most important, the Indians was so much liquor. That was part of it, obviously. So that's 1807. The Treaty of Saginaw, 1819, is negotiated by Lewis Cass, who was then the governor of Michigan Territory, again, from 1805 to about the mid-1830s. Michigan's a territory, and Lewis Cass is the governor of Michigan Territory. The Treaty of Saginaw was negotiated with a lot of liquor, and Cass is behind that. In the middle, of the slide, bottom middle of the slide, Chicago Treaty 1821. There you're getting basically the southwest corner of Michigan, Treaty of Chicago 1821. The Treaty of Washington 1836, which is the west side of Michigan and all of the northern part of the Lower Peninsula, plus a good part of the Upper Peninsula, the eastern and central and eastern part of the Upper Peninsula. And then the Treaty of La Pointe of 1842 is the rest of the Upper Peninsula, the western part, and then that small part, Treaty of Cedar Point, 1856. That's a much later time. That's a different treaty there. So, but the idea here is that the U.S. is going through treaties to get this land. Whether they followed them later is another issue. Most of the time they didn't. Treaty of Saginaw, they renegotiate that. They renegotiate the Treaty of Washington. They renegotiate all of them to the point that the Indians, quite frankly, got screwed out of most of them. That's really what happened. They promised to pay annuities, meaning we'll pay you $20,000 for the rest of whatever, but they don't follow that. They renegotiate it and don't pay the annuities that they should pay. And that's why the tribes of Michigan are left out, where they are today, quite frankly. Erie Canal. The Erie Canal is built beginning in 1817 by the state of New York. It's built between 1817 and 1825. Again, if the pictures on my screen are on the right, so you may not see, it starts in above Albany and Troy, New York. It's 365 miles, and it goes from Troy all the way across New York and ends up in Buffalo, 365 miles. The big thing about it, one of the things is it goes basically from 0 to 500 feet in the profile of the canal. So there has to be various locks on it. And I'm going to show you some more pictures shortly. The big thing about the Erie Canal is before it is built, basically it would take You would leave New York, go up the Hudson River before 1817, before 1825. It's finished in 1825. Before 1825, if you were in New York City, you'd have to take a sailboat because there was no powered boats before then, no steamboats. And you'd have to take a sailboat up to Troy, New York, which is north of Albany, and then take a wagon train across to Buffalo, take another sailboat over to across Lake Erie to Detroit. That would take you 10 weeks. When the Erie Canal is finished, it takes you 10 days. 10 days. So this is a big deal. Here's Lockport, New York. As you can see, there's the locks there, and look up the center of the slide, a little about 2/3 of the way up. You can see the locks as they go along in the distance. Called Lockport because there are many, many locks. On the left side of the screen, there looks like a man in green who is dumping something over the side. That was the average canal boat. That's the kind that you would travel in, and you would pay 3 cents a mile, or about $11, to travel the 365 miles. And again, it was about 10 days. 3 cents a mile, you get no food or bed, which means you would sleep on the top probably, wherever you could find a space to sleep. 4 cents a mile, or $14.60. You get bed and board, meaning you get food, and they would section off with blankets certain areas inside where you could sleep. And that's the way you traveled on the Erie Canal. It was built basically by Irishmen that were brought over. That's not the big Irish immigration in the United States. The big Irish immigration is from 1845 to 1850, when they have the big potato famine in Ireland. And they come here basically, there's no food. The potatoes are rotting in the ground because they've got some sort of pestilence, which they never did quite figure out what it was. And so the big Irish one is done. But this is what the Erie Canal would look like between about 1825 after it's going. And this is one of the major things why Michigan is settled. And that's why you end up with towns like Utica, Michigan, and Rochester, Michigan, because those are names that came from New York. That's how they came here. So we've got the treaties, the Erie Canal. Number 3, steamships. This is the first steamship on the Great Lakes. It's called the Walk on the Water, or Walk on the Water, 1818. So you get into Buffalo on the Erie Canal, you take the Walk on the Water. The steamship would just it doesn't matter if there's wind or too much wind or no wind, you can take the Walk on the Water all the way across from Buffalo to Detroit. And so the time doesn't it's going to be relatively quick, in a day or two. And that's the big thing. The steamships on the Great Lakes, the Walk on the Water. Land for sale. So they opened a land office in 1818 in Detroit. Now you can buy land. It's been surveyed. You can go to Detroit. So in 1820, land has become cheap. It's $1.25 an acre. Before that, it actually starts in the 1780s for $1 an acre. But you say, oh, that's even better. But you have to buy a minimum of 600 acres. Well, that's $600. So what happens is then only men with big money can buy, and then they just sit on it for years and years. Well, the problem is nobody can get to Michigan until the Erie Canal is built, so nothing was really happening. But by 1820, land can be bought for $1.25 an acre, and there's no max that you have, or no minimum you have to buy. So at $1.25 an acre, you can buy 80 acres, which is a great farm, for $100. That's the big thing. Michigan Fever 1836 means that actually in 1836, they sell 4 million acres of land in Michigan. And that's why it's said that in the East, there's something called, quote, Michigan Fever, because a lot of people are buying land. Now we're getting into what happens with Michigan. So Stevens T. Mason, yes, the first name is not misspelled. Stevens T. His name he has an S on Stephen. Stevens T. Mason. He was the Secretary of Michigan Territory. Actually, his father was a secretary, and his father's name was John Mason, and he was appointed Secretary of Michigan Territory, and by Andrew Jackson. He was a friend of Andrew Jackson. Well, he had a son, Stephen T., who this man here. He was only probably about 16. His father was appointed as Secretary of Michigan Territory, and his father did a good job, and Stephen T. actually helped him a lot. And his father actually wanted to resign. So he wanted to resign and go to Texas. So he takes a roundabout way of going to Texas by going to see Andrew Jackson in Washington, D.C. and say, I want to resign, but I want you to appoint my son to be the Secretary of Michigan Territory. And so Jackson says, okay, I'll appoint him. Stephen T. is only 19 years old. Now, at that time, a 19-year-old had much more maturity than we see in 19-year-olds today. And a power in the governor's absence is this. At this time, in 1831 especially, it didn't really matter what time. What happens is the governor is the head of the territory, Michigan Territory, and the secretary is in charge when the governor is out of the territory. So that is definitely a good thing. It's like the secretary is like a vice president. And when the governor is out of the territory, he is the governor. He is the governor. He's the acting governor. He can do whatever he wants. He has all the power of the governor. Oh, well, now this is a good deal. And the governor has gone a lot. Okay, so Stevens T. Mason has a lot of power. First, the people complain about it to Jackson. And Stevens T. writes to Jackson and says, I can handle this. I've actually helped my father a lot. And Jackson says, okay, fine, you go ahead and handle it. So, meanwhile, U.S. Congress calls for a survey of Michigan. So they're going to start surveying the land, break it up, and have it for people to buy. So 1816, but the problem is the War of 1812 happens. So the survey of 1812 doesn't happen because the War of 1812 happens. So 1816 comes along, and a man named Tiffin, who is the head of the U.S. Land Survey, comes back with a report, and it says that Michigan land is terrible, and you don't want people can't, there isn't 1 acre in 1,000 acres that's worth anything in Michigan. The plan had been for the men who served in the War of 1812, they were going to be given bounty land. Now, bounty land means if you serve in the War of 1812, we will give you 100 acres of land free just by serving in the War of 1812. And they moved that bounty land to to Illinois. So this is not a good thing for Michigan. They lost a big chance of having many people settle. Now, the Harris survey is done by Ohio men, and it gives the survey of the Ohio line of 1817 survey, favors Ohio again for the border. Remember, we're talking about the border here. That's the big thing for Ohio, because they want to keep Toledo in Ohio. A Fulton survey uses the Northwest Territory line of 1818, and it favors Michigan. So again, it's all about what's going to happen to Toledo here. That's what's going on here. And so the blue line here shows the Northwest Territory line, and the red line shows the Ohio Constitution line, and you can see to the right, way in the corner there where it says Toledo. So it's all about a strip of land called the Toledo Strip. So the Northwest Ordinance way back in 1787 puts Toledo in Michigan, but the Ohio Constitution line of 1803 puts Toledo in Ohio. Michigan Territory, 1805, Congress sets the boundary with Toledo in Michigan. So there's going to be this constant back and forth. Who's going to be right? And the big problem, again, for Michigan is Michigan's a territory. They have a representative who sits in Congress and can stand up and talk, but doesn't have a vote at all. Ohio is a state. They have at least one representative in the U.S. House, and they have 2 senators in the U.S. Senate. It's not good for Michigan. So in 1820, a U.S. committee recognizes the line that puts Toledo in Michigan. So in 1822, Monroe County, the Monroe County that we know today, organizes with the Fulton line, meaning Toledo is in Michigan. So in 1827, Port Lawrence, what we know as Toledo today, is organized. Port Lawrence, Toledo is, Port Lawrence Township is organized, Toledo, including Toledo. And the public land that is bought in Toledo is registered in Monroe County Land Office. So this is all being done with Toledo being included in Michigan. That's all taken care of and set there. So how do we go to statehood? 1832, a census is taken in Michigan, and it says there's 86,000 people. You only need 60,000 to become a state. So Michigan's going to become a state. They ask at the same time in the year 1832 to citizens, would you like to become a state? Of course, the citizen says yes. So in 1833, the next year, Michigan petitions the US Congress and says, we want to become a state, and we want our boundary to be by the Northwest Ordinance, which again is going to include Toledo being in Michigan. Here's our same slide we saw earlier. Northwest Ordinance, Toledo in Michigan, Ohio Constitution, Toledo's in Ohio. So there's going to be a problem here. Stevens T. Mason, okay, again, he's the secretary. July of 1834, oh, hello. The governor, whose name is Porter, dies. Now Mason is the governor because the governor is dead and he's a secretary and he's going to act as the governor anyways. In January of 1835, at this point in time, I said that the governor, a secretary, and 3 judges ran the territory. At a certain point in time, with a certain amount of people would be residing in a particular territory, they would kick into a thing called a territorial legislature. So it's just like our legislatures today. And they passed a thing called the Pains and Penalties Act. And what this meant that only Michigan government officials could function in that thing called the Toledo Strip. Toledo Strip it's about 8 miles north and south, and then it goes like a pie, like a piece of pie, getting thinner and thinner to the point as it's going west. Meantime, since Michigan is asked to be a state, they didn't ask Congress. They asked Congress, we want to be a state, and then they just proceeded to have set up a constitutional convention. So at the bottom of that slide, it says, June 1835, Michigan has its first constitutional convention. So they proceed to have a whole constitutional convention and set up a government. Then the Toledo War happens, April to September of 1835. In April 1835, Ohio surveyors are fired on while on break. So Michigan has a series of men that they put together, which is basically a group of militiamen. So we've got Michigan troops in April of 1835 arrest Ohio men in the Toledo Strip. Okay, so they say, you can't be in our strip. This is our territory. You're from Toledo. You're from Ohio. This belongs to Michigan. And then on June 24th, 1835, Michigan has that first constitution. They pass a constitution. And then in July of 1835, blood is drawn. What kind of blood? Real blood. Okay, who's this guy? Stickney. All right. There was a guy that lived in Ohio. His name was Benjamin Franklin Stickney, and he had 2 sons. And this guy was named Stickney. Benjamin Franklin Stickney believed that his son should be able to, you're laughing there, I can see you laughing. I don't know if you know this story. I think it's a good story. Benjamin Franklin Stickney had served in the War of 1812. He had actually, I think, achieved the rank of brigadier general in the Ohio militia. And he believed that his sons, when they grew up, should be able to choose their own names. So he named his sons 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Said, okay, now when you're older, you choose your own names. Except these boneheads stayed named 1 and 2 their whole life, as far as I know. And so two, as the Monroe County Sheriff is trying to literally arrest his father, Benjamin Franklin, two pulls out a knife and stabs the sheriff, runs off to Ohio, and hides out. So the word is out, we got to catch two Stickney. And that's how the blood is drawn. Nobody else gets shot. Nobody else is hurt. There's no real attacks in the War of 1812. I'm in the Toledo War. And that's as close as you get to blood being drawn in the Toledo War. In August of 1835, Michigan troops go to the Toledo Strip. On the 29th of August in 1835, Andrew Jackson, the president, removes Mason from office. And on September 7th, 1835, what happens is the war ends because Ohio officials go to, on September 7th, 1835, they go into the Toledo Strip. They have a midnight court on September 7th, 1835. So at midnight, they have a court session that meets in the Toledo Strip, and it's just like 5 or 10 minutes at the most. So they have established themselves as meeting in this Toledo Strip where they shouldn't be, according to Michigan's Pains and Penalties Act. And then they hightail it back to Ohio. So when the Michigan troops get there, literally, so that's at midnight. When the Michigan troops get there that same day, technically by the calendar, in the light of day, these men are gone. But that's it. It just fizzles out after that. And there's no one to arrest. So the men go back to Ohio and, the Michigan men go back to Michigan. And basically that's where things die. Now, June 1836, finally, what happens is Michigan become a state if it gives up the Toledo Strip. Michigan says, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it. It's, we've got it legally. We've got that Northwest Ordinance from the 1780s that says that this line is going to be drawn from the southern point of Lake Michigan all the way east, and that's ours. And, but the second bullet point here says, there's a U.S. surplus. There's money in there that can go to all the states. Guess what? It's about $13,500, which is like chicken feed to us today, but it's big money back then. And it only goes to states. Okay, so Michigan can't get it. It's only a territory. So in December 1836, Michigan has a thing called the Frostbitten Convention because it's in December. It's cold. So they make up this name, the Frostbitten Convention. Ohio gets Toledo. Michigan gets the rest of the Upper Peninsula because they had just basically what we know as Sault Ste. Marie today. And that's how the Toledo War ends. And that's how it's resolved. It's interesting because at that point, people said the useless Upper Peninsula, but in fact, what's over in the Western Peninsula? The copper mines, and they discover iron in the 1840s. And so Michigan is the 26th state, January 26, 1837. I think we make out in the end there. Anybody have any questions? I don't know how to turn on the questions. Rob?
I don't see any questions. One question I had when you were showing the 5 states,
Mm-hmm.
I saw Minnesota up in the corner. Was that Minnesota involved with that at all?
No, they were not. That comes at a later time.
Okay. Anyone have a question? You can either turn off your mute and or ask in chat. Oh, here's one from Maria. From Whom did Michigan get the UP? Why was Mason removed from office by Andrew Jackson? So she has two questions.
He was removed because Jackson was saying, we've got to end this thing. And that's basically why he was removed from office. And then that took a lot of the wind out of the sails. And so he's removed on August 29th. So then on September 7th, just like, a week later, they go down to Ohio. And by basically Ohio having that nighttime court just basically thumbing their nose at Michigan, and Michigan gets there and there's nothing there, then it's just kind of, the wind goes right out of the sails and out of the balloon, as one would say, and it kind of just dies there. And Michigan needs to throw them that, or Michigan, they need to get out. They've got $13,000 worth of money to pay this militia, which they don't have really. And so this chance of getting this money from the surplus is kind of okay, let's get out of this thing and get something. And we get the Upper Peninsula. And this is 1837. By 1844, they're finding out about the iron. About the iron up there. A guy named Burt is sent up to survey, just literally to survey the land, to break it up just like we have down here with all of our townships and all this sort of thing. And he said, his compasses are going nuts because all of the land below them is iron, and it's all built on, the compass is built on magnetics. And they say, wow, this is fantastic. They didn't know the iron was there. They knew the copper was there. The Indians knew that. And they had told the British and the French about that. But so yeah, it was a way to get out. Jackson had to do something because the Michiganders weren't giving in, and they had the law on their side from the Northwest Orioles. Yes. Anything
And
else?
she also asks if.
I think can you hear me?
Yes. Oh yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Rob. I'm unmuted now. Oh, from whom did Michigan get the UP? When you said they got the rest of it, they just had.
In other words, the U.S. Senate worked it out so that Ohio would get. So there was a compromise. Ohio would get the border they wanted, and Michigan would be given. See, at this point, that the Western UP was not really part of Michigan territory, but it became part of the state. They moved so it was basically taken away from Wisconsin.
Oh, Wisconsin. Oh, okay.
It's
So
taken away from Wisconsin territory. And Wisconsin didn't have anything. They didn't have as a territory. They couldn't really say much because they're under the federal government.
Oh, right. So when you were talking about that westernmost point, you mentioned something called Cedar Point
No, that was a treaty.
Oh, that was a treaty. Okay, thanks.
Treaty. So because you tend to think of the Cedar Point that we know today. So that was a later treaty in the 1850s. That was part of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in essence, Jeff, Andrew Jackson took Mason out of office because things were stalling and they weren't getting anywhere.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Mason, and interesting. I didn't go into this because what I'm going to say now is it got basically what happens is nobody of any of those states uses the Northwest Territory line. Indiana does the same thing, as does Illinois.
Okay.
Yeah, they all do it. Indiana wants a port on Lake Michigan. So does Illinois. So they all jockey the line around. And since Ohio's kind of established it already, nobody really complains about it. So Michigan got, for lack of a better word, kind of screwed on it all the way down the line. But they had the law on their side.
And the Ohio River is still the boundary for Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois today?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Yep.
Okay, interesting. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Maria.
Attending. I don't know what one says today, attending or watching.
I know. What do you say?
Right. Okay.
Attending sounds good.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for a wonderful talk.
Okay.
I'll try and get this on YouTube tomorrow if anyone wants to watch it or have somebody who you'd recommend it to.
Okay.
So everyone have a nice evening, and
Thank
we'll
you.
see you at our next presentation.
Okay,
Okay.
now he talked about being at Northville Library the 13th.
Yeah, I'm going to do a Zoom at Northville. If my understanding from talking to Northville people, if you go to their website under events, it has a whole page and it lists the Zoom with the access point and the number and everything there already. You don't have to register from what I understand, but if you do register, you'll get emails reminding you about it as it gets closer. It's August 13th at 7 p.m. Northville District Library.
And what's the title of that?
Oh, the title is Streets of Detroit.
Ah, okay, thanks. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you, everyone. If you could come next Tuesday night, even though we'll be closed for the election, we will have our trivia night. So everyone's welcome. It starts at 6:30.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
okay. Bye.
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 Bye.